Instructions. On the screen, you will see 10 blue words. Each of these blue words has a corresponding red number to its left. That is the assigned number. Place that number in the box that is in front of the appropriate definition for that word. You will have approximately 2 minutes. Our first word on the list is dispersive. It comes from the verb disperse. It means to drive off or send off in various directions. You can scatter something and disperse something. For example, you could scatter or disperse leaves in the wind, or you could disperse a crowd, scatter a crowd, disperse a crowd, scatter leaves, disperse leaves. The words scatter and disperse are mostly synonymous. In a secondary sense, the word dispersive means to diffuse or disseminate or spread. They're very closely related. Pay close attention to that prefix dis. Dis usually means a reversal, such as disassociate or disarray. Sometimes it means apart, such as disconnect. The root spare, S-P-E-R, is from a Latin word for scatter, so it makes sense that the word disperse means to scatter. Dispersive is not a difficult word. I added it to the list to get you used to prefixes. That dis prefix is very common, and I want you to think of it as a prefix that gives an indication of reversal or being apart from something. I hope you're not displeased with that, and I hope that doesn't bring on your displeasure. It should be paired up with the last definition on the list, to drive off or to send off in various directions. Our next word is impecunious. This word mostly has only one meaning. It means to be without money, be broke, be penniless. It comes from the Latin prefix in or im, meaning not. Remember, in or im sometimes means not. And the root pecunious, which is the Latin word for money. Pecunia was money in Latin. We also get the words pecuniary if you're talking about money things. If any of you go to business school, you'll talk about pecuniary items, money items. And that should be pared down with the 6th down on the list, excessively poor. Our third word is an interesting word. We've mentioned it before. It's benevolent. The word benevolent means to express goodwill or kindly feelings. And you should really compare that with the word we talked about before, malevolent. The Latin bene meant good, and the Latin vul meant wish. So this is good wishes. If you recall, the word malevolent meant bad wishes. We get a lot of benes in English, and it's close to the word bone also, B-O-N. Bene is a word that forms beneficial, benefactor, benediction. Benediction is a good saying that's used in some religious services. A benefit is something for good purposes. So we get a lot of words from the root bene. It should be paired up with the eighth down on the list, goodwill or kindly feelings. The next word on the list is ostracize. Very interesting word, a very powerful word. Originally, the word ostracize was purely meant to banish somebody, generally banish them out of the country. In a more general sense, we now use it to mean you're excluded from any sort of group, generally by general consent, from certain parts of society or friendship. It's an interesting word. It's a Greek word. In ancient Greece, they had this rule that you are able to banish somebody from the country for 10 years. This was used in Athens in particular. Men would gather around to vote, and they would use these broken bits of pottery. They call them shards. The Greeks called them ostra, broken pieces of pottery, and they would vote on that. And if you got enough votes, you could boot somebody out of the country. I'm sure that would be a popular device that we could use today. I don't know why we got rid of that concept. It's a pretty clever thing to do. But ostracize is a good word, very powerful word. You see it used a lot on standardized tests. It should be paired up with the second down on the list, to exclude by general consent from society. Our next word on the list is abbreviate, and I think most of you know what an abbreviation is, but it's used a little bit more broadly than what most people think it's used as. Most people see an abbreviation as a shortening of a word by omitting letters. For example, instead of saying the University of Florida, you might say U of F. Abbreviations are very common with certain companies. International Business Machine is IBM. Those are abbreviations. They're shortenings. But in a more general sense, in the sense that you'll see it on test, to abbreviate means to reduce anything in length or duration, to make shorter. So I had an abbreviated meeting, so that's a good use of the word abbreviate. It comes from the Latin, of course, abbreviatus, and that meant to shorten. We still get a lot of words with that brf in it. Remember, F and V sound very close together, so they get convoluted in language. The Latin word for brief was brevis, so our word brief does mean short. So that all makes sense, doesn't it? You might want to compare that word with brevity, to shorten. The word abbreviate should be paired up with the fourth definition down on the list, to shorten or reduce. Our next word is deluge. In the strictest sense, a deluge has to be a great flood of water. If any of you are familiar with the story of Noah's Ark, that was a great deluge. It flooded the earth. Many cultures throughout the world have a great flood story, a deluge story. In a more general sense, deluge could be anything that overwhelms you, such as a flood does. It overwhelms you. You can be deluged with work. You could be deluged with problems. So often you use the word deluge in a negative sense. It clearly comes from the Latin prefix de, from. Sometimes the dictionary says it's from dis, but from, away, makes no difference. And the Latin root luere, which was a form of lavare, which meant to wash. We still get lave, wash, when we go to the laboratory. That's, of course, a euphemism for a washroom or a toilet. It should be paired with the seventh one down, a great flood, something that overwhelms like a flood. Our seventh word on the list is to accost. The word accost in its most common way is to confront boldly. The beggar accosted me for money, sort of got very aggressive with me. In a more broad sense of usage, it just means to approach, especially when you have a greeting or a question or a remark. I think most people use it in that negative way, though. It's from the Latin ad, which we cut off just leaving the A, and costa, which meant side. If you go up to somebody's side, you're actually accosting them. Note that that coast thing is still used when we talk about the coast of a country. We're talking about the side of the country that faces the ocean. So we still have that. Cost also meant rib, but that's complicated. The word accost should be paired with the ninth one down, to approach or confront aggressively. Our eighth word is espouse, and it's to make one's own. It means to adopt or embrace a cause. I espouse communism, or I espouse capitalism, or I espouse any sort of political belief. You hear that a lot. In the less common manner these days, the word espouse means to marry. 100, 200 years ago, when you got married, it was being a spouse. If you notice, the word spouse, which is your husband or your wife, is still in the word. It's from a French word. A lot of those domestic words that we use are still from the French, but it came indirectly from the Latin sponsere, which meant to sponsor. The root spond meant surety, guaranteed, to give assurance or promise. And you can see how that's very related to marriage. It's a solemn oath, supposedly. Of course, we would like that to be true. We get the word spond in a lot of words, such as respond. And that should be paired with the third one down, to support or to marry. Again, I think you should be thinking of a spouse as to support a cause more than marriage. I think that's the way you'll see it on a test. Our ninth word is pariah. A pariah is an outcast, or any person or animal that is despised or avoided. And it should be paired with the fifth one down, an outcast. The word pariah itself is a strange word. It's not related to any European word. If you notice, most of our words have been related to Greek or Latin or Old English or French or German. This was a word that we got from southern India, and a pariah was actually one of the lower caste in southern India. Our final word, the 10th word, is propriety. It has several meanings. In general, it just means conformity to established standards. It also can mean appropriateness to the purpose, or perhaps a rightness or justness. It's not a difficult word. It's from the Latin proprietatem, and it meant appropriateness or fitness or ownership. So we still get the word proper from the word. If something's proper, it evokes propriety. It's also still associated with the word property, which was the original sense in Latin. And it should be paired down with the very beginning of the list, decency, a state of being proper. So those are those 10. Let's go on to the next group.